look at these two lovebirds. So sweet. Young love, you know. He's so excited to see her, he literally climbed a ladder. And things must be getting a bit steamy out because Romeo is already removing his jacket. But wait, what is she looking at? Shh.
I didn't say anything.
Oh. Things are getting steamy. I think I should leave. A wise woman once said, love is a battlefield, but what if it's more like a really high stakes game? This piece is called The Meeting, and it's part of a 4-painting series titled The Progress of Love by Jean Honore Fragonard. Fragonard created these paintings at the height of his career for a woman named Madame du Barry, who just so happened to be the official mistress to King Louis XV. That was a real job title back then. But when she finally received the finished paintings, she rejected them. But for Fragonard, this wasn't any old setback. This was the beginning of the end, his final love letter to a world that ghosted him. But it wasn't always this way for Fragonard. Let's go back to Paris in the year 1752. Fragonard is 20 years old and has just won the highly prestigious Prix de Rome scholarship. Fragonard's win surprised everyone. Nobody really knew who he was. He had never received any formal education from the academy, and he wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Jean Honore Fragonard was born in 1732 in Grasse, France, a town famous for perfume, which is fitting really since his paintings practically reek of rose petals, powdered wigs, and something a little fishier that I can't put my finger on. Maybe it's all the compost. His father was a glove maker who, due to some bad investments, went bankrupt when Fragonard was a teenager, so they packed up and moved to Paris to start over. Fragonard's parents wanted him to pursue a practical, stable career, but even at a young age, his talent was impossible to ignore. They agreed to let him study under the artist Francois Boucher, where Fragonard was steeped in his frothy Rococo scenes. But the Academy wasn't interested in that pastel trash. They wanted big, noble history paintings. But the thing is, Fragonard could do that too, like really well. The Prix de Rome was a scholarship that was awarded by the French government to young artists, giving them the opportunity to study in Rome. While Fragonard was in Italy, he was expected to soak up some classical gravitas, so he was ready to come back painting gods, heroes, and morally upright nudes. And he did that, kind of. But he mostly wandered around sketching gardens and putting off assignments. I guess you could say that inner Rococo rascal was already showing through the cracks. But he made up for it when he returned to France and debuted a moody mythological painting titled Croesus sacrificing himself to save Callirrhoe. This piece got Fragonard accepted into the Royal Academy in 1765. But here's the tea. Fragonard could have been an academic artist. He could have been the respectable history painter of their dreams, but he chose not to. And this drove the Academy nuts. Their promising protege didn't even bother to submit his reception piece, which would have solidified his place in the Academy, and he never made a history painting ever again. The Academy looked on in horror as their golden boy went to the dark side, and there was nothing they could do to stop him. According to art historian Mary Sheriff, Fragonard left history painting not because of a predisposition to laziness, or an indifference to gain and fame, or a desire to work according to his own rules, but because he saw the promise of financial success elsewhere. Writer Louise d'Epinay puts it a bit more bluntly. Fragonard wastes his time and his talent. He makes money. Fragonard followed the money, and the money led him to paint rich people frolicking in lush private gardens. The most famous one of his commissions was The Swing. A man lies in a bush and looks up his mistress's skirt, while the other man, presumably her oblivious husband, pushes her in the swing. It was cheeky, it was raunchy, and it was catnip for Fragonard's fat cat clients, but left the academics clutching their pearls. They labeled him a sellout, his subjects unserious, his brushwork undisciplined. Despite the haters, Fragonard was one of the most sought-after painters among the wealthy elite, and while he was working for some private clients in Paris, he caught the eye of a woman named Madame du Barry. She was in the process of building a pavilion next to her chateau at Lucienne that she called her Pleasure Pavilion, and needed an artist to decorate one of the rooms. In 1771, she commissioned Fragonard to to paint a 4-part series called The Progress of Love. It was the biggest commission of his career, and he spent a full year perfecting it. Get ready for the Rococo rom-com of your dreams. Or your nightmares, if your name is Jean Honore Fragonard. We're placed in a lush private garden. Sunlight spills across the scene and draws our eyes to a young woman at the bottom center of the painting. Her arms and legs are flung wide. Her opulent gown twists around her, indicating her startled, abrupt movement. She looks like she might be falling, or making a run for it. But why? Because of him? A young man emerges behind a planter with his arm outstretched, offering the girl a single pink rose. But she seems like she doesn't want anything to do with him, I think, anyway. She's surrounded by 2 other girls that are practically glued to her dress. They look like they're trying to hold her in place to keep her from running away. Behind them, a towering tree echoes the shape of the girl's outstretched arms and frames a putti sculpture underneath. These babies appear to be riding a dolphin, or maybe they're trying to hold it back, since in Greek mythology, gods would recruit dolphins to help them capture beautiful maidens. To me, this painting encapsulates that moment right before, when desire, hesitation, and excitement is suspended, and we're left wondering, does she love him, or does she love him not? Some time has passed since we last saw our star-crossed lovers, and a lot has changed. The boy climbs a ladder over a garden wall to meet his beloved, which seems slightly dramatic given how low the wall actually is, but we'll let him have his Romeo and Juliet moment. It doesn't take long to realize that this little meeting is more mischievous than it seems. They're all alone, and based on their body language, it doesn't look like they're supposed to be. The lush garden has become more dense, more tangled, more complicit. Their bodies lean in toward one another. The girl looks over her right shoulder to check if the coast is clear. She raises her left hand toward her suitor to tell him not to come any closer. He waits for her to signal to him that they're alone. This painting is my favorite in the series, and I'll tell you why. Fragonard designed The Progress of Love to hang in a horseshoe-shaped room in Madame du Barry's pavilion, which doesn't really matter for any reason other than I think we should bring horseshoe-shaped rooms back. But anyway, there were 2 entrances into the room, one from the main salon of the house and one from the garden outside. So you'd see the pursuit on your left and the meeting on your right and the entrance into the garden in between them, which means when the woman in the meeting glances back over her shoulder, she's actually looking toward the real-life garden. It's like she's checking to see if you or any unsuspecting guest strolling in from the garden might catch them sneaking around. Overhead is a sculpture of Venus, the goddess of love, snatching Cupid's quiver of arrows from him. But she's too late. The arrows are gone. The damage is done. This meeting wasn't supposed to happen. Not yet, anyway. But you know what they say. Whatever happens in the mystical fairy garden stays in the mystical fairy garden. We're back in Fantasyland, and it feels so good. We've had our hors d'oeuvres, followed by a tense little appetizer, and now it's time for the main course. And apparently the main course is oranges. Syrupy golden sunlight drips onto the lovers nestled beneath an orange tree, a classic symbol of fertility and consummation. The garden has never looked better. The flowers are unapologetically in bloom. The couple doesn't have to hide anymore. The boy kneels at her feet as he melts into her lap and looks up at her as if she's a goddess. And with that dress, she might as well be. She sits upright, looking confident and calm. She's in complete control. She gently holds his hand while reaching her right arm out to place a wreath of flowers on her lover's head. This is the moment he's been waiting for. She's crowning him as her official lover and documenting it for the world to see. She looks over her shoulder toward an artist sitting over in the corner of the painting, painting the couple. Maybe Fragonard added this to hint at his own role for Madame du Barry. Above it all, a sculpture of baby Cupid naps peacefully on a cloud. His quiver is empty. His arrows are spent. He's clocked out. Mission accomplished. Dessert? It's golden hour in Fantasyland. At the center of the painting, our couple basks in the glow. She sits at the base of a grand stone pillar, calm and composed. He stands beside her, arms wrapped tenderly around her waist, gazing up at her like she's hung the moon. They're reading through a stack of old love letters, reliving what they once felt, or maybe still feel. A heart-shaped clearing in the trees lets the sunlight pour in, scattering warm light across the ground. Roses tumble at their feet, and a little dog lounges beside them. Dogs were often included in paintings as a symbol of fidelity. A petal pink parasol rests on the pillar beside them, and above is a sculpture of a woman holding a heart, which was a symbol of friendship at the time. There was this belief in 18th century France that over time, romantic love would gradually dissolve into a great friendship. Maybe that's what Fragonard is depicting here, but personally, I still see a lot of sexual tension in this painting because, as far as I know, friends don't touch friends in that spot specifically. This painting feels like a warm exhale, like a dream you don't want to wake up from, but we have to, because next we need to talk about the woman behind it all, the one who commissioned this entire fantasy, Madame du Barry, whose real life was a far cry from Fragonard's dreamy love garden. Madame du Barry was born Jean Baptiste in August 1743 in northern France. The daughter of a poor seamstress, Jeanne was born out of wedlock, and her father's identity remains a mystery. If he ever made an appearance in her life, it definitely wasn't very often. When Jeanne was about 3, her mother Anne became intimately involved with a man named Monsieur Billiard de Monceau, who took both of them in to live with him. Anne worked as a cook for de Monceau's mistress, Francesca. Francesca took a liking to little Jeanne and paid for her education at a convent on the outskirts of Paris. Jeanne left the convent at around age 15, and not long after, she and her mother were evicted from de Monceau's home. Life got a bit scrappy after that. She started selling trinkets on the streets of Paris to help make ends meet, and eventually found work assisting a hairdresser. Their working relationship briefly turned romantic. Some speculate she may have had a child with him, though there's no definitive proof. Either way, the hairdresser's mother kicked Jeanne out once she realized her son was with a working-class girl. Jeanne then took a job as a companion to an elderly widow, but that ended abruptly when she caught the attention of 2 of the widow's married sons and one of their wives. That's when Jeanne started working at a milliner's shop in Paris that catered to the city's elite. It was here that she picked up 2 important skills: how to dress like money and how to captivate powerful men. At this point, Jeanne had gone from rags to slightly nicer rags. But her life was about to change fast. One evening while visiting a fashionable casino/brothel in Paris, Jeanne caught the eye of the establishment's owner, Jean-Baptiste du Barry. Jean-Baptiste lived large and funded his lavish lifestyle by pimping out beautiful women to powerful men. And when he saw Jeanne, he didn't just see a beautiful girl, he saw money. Jeanne had thick, curly blonde hair, captivating blue eyes, and glowing skin. But she seemed to cause trouble wherever she went. Even her beauty was controversial. Madame de Genlis once said, her bearing was revoltingly impudent, and her features far from handsome. But she had fair hair of a charming color, pretty teeth, and a pleasing expression. She looked extremely well at night. Regardless, no one could deny Jeanne had it. That elusive, magnetic charm. With some rebranding, Jean-Baptiste du Barry turned Jeanne into a high-class courtesan under the name Mademoiselle Lange. She became his mistress, and also his top girl. In just a few years, Jeanne was entertaining Paris's elite and supporting both herself and her mother in absolute luxury. And it was because she was very good at her job. Jean-Baptiste watched the most powerful, uptight men turn to mush in Jeanne's presence. He knew what he had to do: get Jeanne in the same room as the King of France. This was Jean-Baptiste's golden opportunity to increase his own influence at court, and he concocted a plan that just might work, but he had to move quickly. King Louis XV had lost his longtime mistress, Madame de Pompadour, to tuberculosis a few years earlier. His queen was seriously ill and nearing the end of her life. The king was grieving and lonely, and Jean-Baptiste knew exactly what, or rather who, could make him feel better. So Jeanne was prepped polished and shipped off to Versailles. Through some very strategic maneuvering, she was positioned in the same wing of the palace as King Louis XV himself. And the plan worked like a charm. 58-year-old King Louis XV took one look at 25-year-old Jeanne and was completely enchanted. But there was just one problem. Jeanne was a courtesan, a working-class nobody. Somebody like her would never be allowed to step foot in Versailles, unless she was someone different, someone noble, perhaps. So Jean-Baptiste du Barry got to work. He orchestrated a quickie marriage between Jeanne and his brother, Count Guillaume du Barry. Then he whipped up a fake birth certificate. This is a list of my channel members. I don't know how that got here, but it seems like a good time to thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Now, where's that other thing? Oh, there. Like I was saying, Jean-Baptiste created a fake birth certificate claiming Jeanne had noble blood and shaved 3 years off her age. Because I guess the 33-year age gap between Jeanne and the king wasn't quite big enough. And just like that, Jeanne Baptiste became Madame du Barry, the official mistress to the King of France, the most powerful woman at Versailles and also the most hated. The people at court weren't fooled by a fake marriage and a piece of paper. They knew exactly who Jeanne was, and they did not think someone like her should be whispering sweet nothings in the king's ear. But her coldest reception came from none other than Marie Antoinette herself. The teenage Austrian princess avoided de Barry like the plague for months. When they finally spoke, Marie Antoinette gave her the iciest little smile and said, "There are a lot of people at Versailles today." But the king was obsessed with Jeanne, and everybody at court was just gonna have to deal with that. Louis XV showered her with fancy clothes and jewels. In 1769, he gifted her a chateau just outside of Paris. Shortly after, she decided to build a pleasure pavilion next door, which Fragonard was commissioned to create the Progress of Love paintings for. But once Fragonard finished the series and delivered them, Madame de Barry decided she didn't want them, and she refused to pay him. There are a few theories as to why she did this. For one, the pavilion was classical in style. Perhaps Fragonard's Rococo style didn't match her aesthetic. But if that were the case, why did she agree to commission him in the first place? Another theory is that the man in the paintings looked a little too much like a young King Louis XV, and the woman looked suspiciously similar to Madame du Barry. But it seems odd that Madame du Barry would take issue with being portrayed as the king's lover. After all, it wasn't a secret that she was his favorite. I haven't seen anyone else mention this, but to me, the woman in the paintings looks way more like Madame de Pompadour, the king's previous mistress, than Madame du Barry. And honestly, that wouldn't be out of character for Fragonard, who was known to slip cheeky little digs into his work, even when it came to his clients. Take The Swing, for example. The gentleman who commissioned it asked Fragonard to paint his mistress on a swing being pushed by a bishop, but Fragonard made him her deceived husband instead. But this theory is a stretch too, because let's be honest, they kind of look the same. Maybe Madame du Barry didn't think the king would appreciate being portrayed as a blubbering lover boy. Whatever the reason, she passed on Fragonard's work and instead hired a different artist to create a new series that was basically the same in theme, but neoclassical in style and a lot less fun. Fragonard didn't take this rejection lightly. He brought the paintings back to his studio, tucked them away, and they stayed there for 20 years. Madame du Barry was the last official mistress to King Louis XV. Once Louis XVI took the throne, Marie Antoinette wasted no time in getting rid of her late father-in-law's former flame. Jeanne was exiled to, I'll give you one guess, it was a convent. Again, after a year, she was permitted to leave and eventually returned to her beloved chateau at Lucienne. She resumed her life as a hopeless romantic, taking up not one, but two lovers at the same time, the Duke of Brissac and Henry Seymour of Redland. The latter was British, married, and not the least bit subtle. He ended their love affair by sending her a portrait with the words, "Leave me alone," written at the bottom in English, which somehow makes it seem even more aggressive. The Duke of Brissac, on the other hand, remained devoted. That is, until one night in early September 1792, when Jeanne heard shouting outside her chateau. She opened a window to investigate, and someone threw something heavy through it. She unwrapped a blood-stained cloth to find her lover, the Duke of Brissac's severed head. The French Revolution was in full swing, but Jeanne wasn't worried. She considered herself apolitical. She'd been away from the court for years, and Marie Antoinette still hated her, so there was no way she was stepping foot in Versailles. But by 1793, both Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were guillotined, and Jeanne didn't know it yet, but she was next. Fearing revolutionary confiscation and brutal taxation, Jeanne devised a plan, something that's sometimes referred to as a fake jewel theft. She enlisted a British agent to help smuggle her jewels to London. This gave her the perfect excuse to travel in and out of France under the pretense of retrieving stolen property. But it wasn't just jewels she was moving. Money, messages, and even people were said to be slipping across the border along with her. That's when suspicions arose that Jeanne was aiding émigrés and engaging in counter-revolutionary activities. She was ultimately exposed by her former slave, Zamore. She was arrested, put on trial, and found guilty of treason. Maybe it was that she was caught off guard. Perhaps it was the fact that she came from nothing and built this big, beautiful life and wasn't going to let it go without a fight. Whatever the reason, while many aristocrats walked silently to the guillotine with their heads held high, Madame du Barry was crashing out. Her portraitist, the legendary Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun, set the scene. Arrested and imprisoned, Madame du Barry was judged and condemned to death by the Revolutionary Tribunal at the end of 1793. She was the only woman amongst the numbers of women who perished in those days who was unable to face the scaffold. She wept. She implored mercy from the horrible crowd which surrounded her, and that crowd was so affected by her entreaties that the executioner hastened to put an end to her agony. I am convinced that had the victims of that awful time not died so courageously, the terror would have ceased much sooner. Madame du Barry's last words were, "Just one more moment, Mr. Executioner." But she didn't get that. She was beheaded on December 8, 1793, at the age of 49. After Madame du Barry's devastating rejection of his work, Fragonard went to Italy to get away for a while. He returned to Paris, but left again in 1790 for his hometown of Grasse. There, he installed the Progress of Love paintings in the home of his cousin. But the room was much larger than the original space at Madame du Barry's pleasure pavilion, so Fragonard expanded the series, adding 10 more canvases to fill up the space. We're back in Fragonard's enchanting garden, though this time it looks like it's submerged in asparagus water. This painting marks the beginning of the second installation of the series. Initially, some believed it depicted a woman in despair because her lover left her. It was widely interpreted as Fragonard's revenge on Madame du Barry for rejecting his earlier works. However, upon closer inspection, that's not the look of despair at all. It's desire. She's having a midday erotic daydream. A Cupid statue above her points forward and signals the time of day, noon, which was the time traditionally associated with heightened sensuality and amorous encounters. In the next painting of the series, we see the god Hymen.
What?
The god of marriage, holding two torches which represent the union of two people. Cupids are kissing, one holds a tambourine, another holds a crown of flowers, all in celebration of love's victory. Then Fragonard introduces us to 4 distinct Cupids, each representing different facets of love. There's love pursuing a dove, representing the type of love that pursues and chases. Then there's love the avenger, where Cupid is stabbing a dove, representing love's capacity for jealousy and vengeance. Then there's love the jester, that depicts a playful Cupid that embodies the lighthearted and humorous side of love. And lastly, love the sentinel, where Cupid hides behind foliage with a finger to his lips, suggesting the secrecy and discretion involved in romantic affairs. To tie the room together, Fragonard added 4 vertical panels featuring hollyhock flowers. These served to extend the garden ambiance into the interior space. This expanded series of 14 paintings remained in Fragonard's family home in Grasse for nearly a century. In 1899, American financier J.P. Morgan acquired them, and upon his death, they were purchased by Henry Clay Frick in 1915. They're now on display at the Frick Collection in New York. The second part of Fragonard's life was much quieter. He still got the occasional private commission from a few loyal patrons, but as the 18th century wrapped up, so did Fragonard's career. But how does that even happen? It's because by the time the French Revolution rolled around, Fragonard's paintings paintings no longer looked charming. They looked grotesque. To the revolutionaries, these idyllic scenes symbolized everything that was wrong with France. Fragonard's art wasn't just out of style, it represented a class of people who threw lavish parties while others starved, who hid behind gilded gates while demanding more taxes from the poor. The aristocracy had been playing in pleasure pavilions while the country burned. Nobody wanted to see the wealthy elite frolicking in lush private gardens. They wanted to see them dead, so they killed them. When the French Revolution began, many of Fragonard's patrons fled or were killed, and Fragonard nearly gave up painting altogether. He faded into such obsolescence that he wasn't even given a proper memorial. As a result, less critical commentary and documentation exists of his works, and a deep dive into his paintings has only begun to take place in recent history. At the end of the day, I think Madame du Barry and Fragonard had a lot in common. They both came from nothing and played by their own rules to climb the social ranks. But when the mood shifted from let them eat cake to off with their heads, nobody, not even their rich and powerful friends, could protect them from the fallout. Although Madame du Barry's descent was much more dramatic while Fragonard's was more of a slow burn, what's worse really, getting your head chopped off or becoming so insignificant that everyone forgets you ever had one? I understand why Fragonard fell out of favor, but I still love his paintings. To me, they feel like stepping into another world. Fragonard once said, "I would paint with my ass." And with that, I would like to pronounce him no longer ghosted.